What's today? I think it's like February 6th. Might be February 7th, 2003. It's Tuesday. I believe it's the 4th, 5th, 6th. I believe it's the 7th. 6 p.m., a little after 6 p.m. I'm driving and I was just thinking to myself about the differences between men and women and the low quality manipulative women that I run into quite a bit and more often and dated and grew up with in my family. I'm thinking back, my grandmother, I don't remember, but I was so young, but she was pretty straightforward with me. But my mother, my sister, the women I dated. So I want to go into this a little bit further because I don't believe that they are manipulating in the same way that men use the term manipulation. And so what I'd also like you to do is if we could take the connotation of manipulation, the connotation of the manipulation, philosophies, hypotheses. If we could take I believe the connotation is the emotional feeling, the denotation is the logical words, what the words mean for what words are. So, when a man acts or a man practices like myself, stoicism, it doesn't mean that we don't have emotions or that we're burying our emotions. It means when I get angry, I know that a chemical is being released in my brain and it's going to go through my brain and it's going to take my body time to process that anger. It happens to me on an animalistic, lizard brain, instinctual level where I'm not in control of my emotions. And what I mean by that is an emotion happens to you based on an outside stimulus. What I am in control of is when that chemical hits, my prefrontal cortex has been pretty well exercised and developed so that that chemical hits me, and then I don't react to that chemical release. So every time a chemical hits me, I don't have to act on that chemical. So I'm pretty even keel. I like to be happy, and sometimes I do, dance. I obviously laugh. I listen to a lot of comedy shows. But when I feel anger, I process that anger, meaning I like to sit there for a couple minutes and be angry, but I don't act on that anger. I just feel the chemicals wave through me of anger, or sadness, or sorrow, or envy, or jealousy, or whatever it is. And then once the chemicals are gone, I can think about what happened and process it in a logical way. Now, women, on the other hand, when they feel sad, they want to cry, they cry. The crying is actually a secondary chemical that helps the first chemical of sadness be removed. Same thing with anger stuff. So they're self-soothing a lot of times with crying. So they're like, oh, cry, it's lethargic and all this. But then you're not processing the emotion. You are self-soothing through crying. Then you can look back and say this, you made me do this, I cried because I saw this, whatever. But you're still letting that chemical wave over you. So I don't, I'm obvious, well, not obvious anymore, but I produce a lot of testosterone and less estrogen. So I don't know what it's like if my body was taking all the testosterone like women and turning it into extra estrogen at high levels. I think it's similar to roid rage. I've never done anabolic steroids, so I don't know. So back to this idea of of manipulation. When you're not showing your emotions to a woman, I was thinking, she feels as if you're lying to her. You're not being your true self around her. So when men are like, why do women date these mean, angry, violent guys that are beating people up, whatever? To her, it probably feels like honesty. Because she's like, well, at least I know this guy's angry. And I know the signs that make him angry. And then, this is where the manipulation part comes in, where a man would see this as emotional manipulation, but women then, similar to the tears, want to then nurture and change their environment through this manipulation to then calm that anger. So like, when people are like, oh, have you read the Dawn of Sex Dusk or whatever, where the bonobo monkeys fuck each other whenever they're angry? It's like, so I think there's a lot of people that live their life like that, like they make up sex and all that bullshit. So the chemicals released, they fight, and then they'll like fight, and then they soothe one another with sex afterwards instead of the tears, and then that becomes like a co thing, and then they wire their brains to a negative, abusive, self-soothing connection, because once the endorphins of sex, those bonding agents come in, your brain is then going to also associate them with that fight, so the abuse of the fight and the argument becomes sexual arousal. Now, if you're dating me and you're trying to get a reaction out of me, or you're screaming at me, or you're upset, or you're crying, or I did something you didn't like, and you don't know where I'm at emotionally because I'm just staring straight ahead at you with a face like I'm playing poker, then you start looking like a crazy person to me, because what'll happen, or I've noticed what'll happen with the women that I'm dating, and my mother did this, so I'm probably repeating some bad behaviors based on other females in my life, but they will go through a whole array of emotions and techniques and throw them at me, and now I'm starting to realize they're just pushing buttons in a machine. They're like the submarine's going down, and they're just hitting all the buttons, hoping that one of the buttons that they hit, wakes me up and gets me fighting with them. And what I want to do is let all the emotions run and then sit down and talk. And so what happens in my relationships is I allow the woman to be angry and cry and get upset, and I sit there and I'll hold her and talk to her or whatever. I don't get angry. Then I say, okay, let's talk about it. And then they start screaming and loud, and I said, hey, I'm not going to sit here and allow you to yell at me. You don't get to yell at me. So either lower your voice and take control of your emotions like a woman and not a child, or we'll have this conversation another time when you can do that. And it keeps getting pushed, and they keep saying I'm controlling their emotions. I'm like, look, I'm not controlling your emotions. Have all the emotions you want. You're just not allowed to direct anger and vitriol and negative words and hurtful words at me. You have to respect me and talk to me like an adult in a civil manner. So I guess to get this out on here is, I think now that a lot of fathers are out of the home, and young men and young women are being raised by women, and women are a social collective, and they talk about this like emotional labor. What they're calling emotional labor, I think men are considering as manipulation. But when a woman is going to a party, or like I'm a man, and when I'm going to a party, I'm like, okay, so-and-so's going to be there, I'm going to stay away from him. if anything happens, I'm just going to let it breeze over me and kind of like prepare myself. So when it does happen, I'm like, yeah, I knew it was going to happen. I think what a woman is doing is she's remembering every emotions and how she feels, and then figuring out a way to act in which to try and control that situation. And I think this is also why so many women think that they're like magic. I know that sounds bad, but it kind of is like magic if they're getting really good at it. So they're like, okay, so-and-so's emotions like this, this, and this. So if I do this, this, and this. But then you get so miserable because your whole life is walking on eggshells trying to control everybody's emotions. And really what it is, it's being a control freak. And it comes from childhood traumas. Imagine, I mean, and men do this too, so it's not just women. But like if you're in a household where you're getting hit, screamed at, yelled at, punished when mom's upset, then you're like, okay, what do I got to do to keep mom from being upset, or dad being upset, or from dad hitting me when he's drunk, or mom yelling at me when she's drunk, or whatever, just the abuse. And then when you get into the real world, that's your idea of relationship and communication. It's an emotional, negative communication. And now, if you put somebody into a work environment who is now gone through, like, you know, say you have a mother, 2 kids, and a husband, and a couple of cousins, a sister, and aunt, you know, maybe you're delegating the emotions of like 10 people. But put somebody in the work environment of 100, 150, 200, 300, thousands of people, and now you got to try to manage the emotions of all these people. I can see why so many women in the workforce, have to be on medication. That would be exhausting. And then they complain, they're like, yeah, well, I'm doing all this emotional labor. No. You're trying to control other people's emotions instead of them just being them. And if you think that I'm being crazy and misogynistic right now, think about this on the large scale. You know, as soon as they let these women out of the kitchen, but think about this on a large scale now, like policing Twitter, policing words, policing schools, all this stuff that they're policing. It's all emotional, like, you know, they call it triggering and upset and all this stuff. It makes perfect sense why we went from a place. The last piece of the puzzle, to interrupt that thought of mine, is that men are used to dealing with the idea of impending violence. So words are nothing to them. I mean, when we joke around with each other with words, it's because it's just funny. Like, we know that it's funnier to be mean with words with one another because we're not beating each other up. Women, on the other hand, because and it's starting to change if you watch YouTube video and TikToks and Instagram videos and stuff, but women have not been hit or had so I'm not saying we should hit anybody. Nobody should be hitting anybody to solve any problems, but women went from being hit to being not hit to being so far removed from even the threat of being hit, because even when the hitting was being removed, the threat was still there, that now the reality of violence is gone. So to them, those words that trigger emotions is an actual physical pain that they're suffering from the chemical reactions that they have to deal with. So if you trigger somebody who's emotional and they have to self-soothe with something, whether it be crying or drugs or alcohol or promiscuity or eating, then now when you go out into society, it makes it seem, to me at least, a little bit easy, where you could see, like, well, you're fat phobic, so if you treat this person like this, this, and this, you're actually creating more of a problem, because then that triggers a chemical in them that they're not in control of, that triggers them to eat, so they get fatter, and you're becoming part of the problem. And then the other person's like, well, get in control of yourself, and, you know, or don't do this or don't say that because they might have been raped, and then it triggers them to this, and when that happens, maybe they go do this, or they do drugs, or if you do this, they become sexual promiscuous. You know, there's the whole group of men that manipulate through words that trigger a woman to be sexual promiscuous based on her past traumas in the pickup culture. It works on men as well now, but not as well. I'm not sure about the exact science on this. It has to do something with the horse that is estrogen, the wild ride that may be. And, men and women are both making testosterone, and women are converting that testosterone into estrogen at a much quicker rate. So I guess to just sum this up, I think that I don't believe in these collectives, so there is collectives, so you can look at the aggregate to get ideas. But in our personal life, or if you're even debating one-on-one with an individual or a stranger on Twitter or online, and you're trying to have the discussions, you want to put yourself into their shoes and be a little empathetic or sympathetic with the position that they're at. Shed this egalitarianism and stop giving people a taste of their own medicine when they say, like, well, I'm a female, I'm equal to man. They're not. If you're a man arguing with a woman, realize that there's a different chemical reaction going on. And the trolls know this. They're trying to do this as well. The trolls, if they don't know the science behind it, they at least know the visceral response of shutting somebody's prefrontal cortex off, where they got the people firing back and forth, and they got them responding. And it's kind of fun to manipulate somebody in a way where they're not even thinking, and then they do something they shouldn't have done that gets them in trouble because the anonymous person kind of egged them on. But when you're on an individual level and you're talking to people, and if you can put yourself in their shoes, whether it be relatives or friends or the relationship that you're in or that you want to be in, the person you're dating or whatever, I'm not saying get walked all over by somebody who's abusive. I'm saying recognize the experiences are different, and if anything, then recognize, even though they're different experience a person's have and they're having a reaction, is that reaction abusive? So if somebody has a chemical reaction to an emotional response that's within themselves, and their immediate thought is to act out and try to be mean to people around them, to me, that's a red flag that you got to get rid of. Whether it's a man that's being aggressive, ladies, physically, you might say, well, at least he's not lying to me. If he's keeping that anger to himself, he's manipulating me, and then I don't know when he's going to snap, what's going on. Well, that's when you have to be like, okay, like, you're quiet or you had an emotional reaction. Later on, can you tell me what's going on? Yes. And the man should, if he's a man, he's going to say, yeah, I was angry and this is why. And then if you get triggered because now it's your turn to be angry because he's postponed this situation in your mind. You got to get angry. The chemicals go through you. You have to self-soothe, or he has to help you soothe, and that thing gets over. Then you go back to the conversation again, and he explains it again. And then you'll get better and better at those communications over the long time. And if it doesn't work, then you just got to leave. Now, having said all that, in the end, I wouldn't call myself an exact lone wolf, but I mean, I speak to maybe 2 people, and once a week. I speak to each of them once a week, and I spend the rest of the time alone. I talk to strangers when I'm out or whatever, but I stay home, I write, I read, I exercise, I run. I spend quite a bit of time by myself. I feel healthy. Maybe I'm not that healthy mentally. I feel extremely healthy. I sleep very well. My vitals are good. My health as well. I'm not on any medications, so I feel like when people say, well, you spend too much time alone, it's not good for you, but it's like if the world is becoming more and more abusive, then I think being by yourself is a better situation than being around a bunch of abusive individuals. So I do play poker, but that's not really, I go out to play poker to have some, joke around with some humans or whatever at the casino, but it's not a true connection. We joke around, but we're trying to take each other's money while we do math. So Anyways, just something to think about. The way that the ideas are processed between people and how those chemical reactions in the brain are used by different types of people. And I'm not saying that women can't. I'm just saying it's more difficult. One thing that I will say, though, is if a man is not in control of his emotions, that is a toxic feminine quality of his that he probably learned from either a weak man or a single from a single mother home. And I think a man who's not in control of his emotions is much more problematic than a woman who's not, because if a woman can't self-soothe, she's physically probably not going to be able to hurt somebody within her surroundings, unless it's a trans woman, but that's not really a woman because we wouldn't have to say trans woman now, would we? But all right, figured I'd trigger you on the way out, so all right, let me see if I ever post this. Have a good night.